I are leading up the CE track. So this is a session that we're doing, and Heidi's going to talk about another session that she is doing at the event as well. And one that we didn't plan a preview for, but we'd love to get your thoughts on is the solve your CRM problems you might have seen on the agenda there, which is our goal for that is we're going to collect some problems or things that you're having at the beginning of the event, and then kind of our speakers will get together and try and figure out how we could solve these problems or some advice that we have to provide to you in that session at the end of the event. So we're super excited about that. And you might have noticed when looking at our list of sessions, I believe 90% of our CE speakers are MVPs, right? I think everybody except for one of our speakers is MVP. So lots of smart people in the room to help you. But let's jump into the preview for Heidi and I's session. We're talking about 50 tips in 50 minutes. So first, let's do a kind of a quick introduction. Heidi, do you want to talk about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Heidi Newhauser. This is a picture of me at the red carpet at the Grammys, which was earlier this year, which will never happen again at a Microsoft conference. It was super cool. But I'm a Microsoft MVP in business applications. I've been working in Microsoft CRM for 12 years now, which is hard to believe. I started with CRM 4.0, and I spent 5 years on the user side as a system administrator. So I feel your pains if you're a user. And I was also on premise at the time. So all throughout my presentations, I typically will point out what features are available if you're on premise, because my heart lies with you on premise people. And today I am a partner. I do Dynamics 365 and Power Platform implementations, and I do a lot of work with Power Automate connectors.
Thank you. And Heidi and I have very similar backgrounds. So I'm Kylie Kaiser. I also started on CRM 4.0 back 10 or 12 years ago and have been doing Dynamics in the Power Platform since then. A lot of my time was also spent at a customer at an end user being the system administrator and the product owner. And now I work at Hitachi Solutions as a solution architect. So both of us are day to day in the platform working on all of these things. So what we want to present to you in our session at DynamicsCon is going to be 50 tips in 50 minutes. So we already have 50 tips documented. So we might even have more than 50 tips by the time we get to DynamicsCon, but our plan will be to spend like 1 minute per slide going through these tips really quickly, maybe even less than 1 minute, because I think we have to deliver this in 45 minutes. So we're going to see how that goes. But for our little preview today, we've prepared a few tips that we want to quickly breeze through so you can kind of get an idea of the session we're going to be doing and all the different kind of types of tips. So you'll see some of the tips are more administrator focused, some of them are more technical. And so we're going to just fast fire those tips at you right now. Heidi, you want to kick it off?
Sure. But it's not too fast. A minute is a surprisingly decent amount of time to talk about a tip. So first tip, which I share with everybody, is to form a group of end users at your organization. If you're already live in Dynamics 365 or Power Platform, it's not too late. You can take advantage of this group of end users. We recommend creating a name for these end users, and you know your culture best at your organization, so you'll come up with some great names. These are some that companies I've worked with in the past have done. When I was a customer, we did super CRMers, and that was our little group. And that's where I made this little super CRM dude, all excited about CRM. And what's important about this group of end users is to make sure that you include varied skill levels. Because I know you want to put all the superstars in there, right? But by including a stick in the mud in that little group, you're going to find out why people aren't using Dynamics, why they don't like CRM, and you can solve it before you roll out a solution. About a minute.
Good job.
I can
Good
keep
job.
going if it's not a minute.
It was perfect. It was perfect.
Okay.
Our
Kylie, you
next
do the
tip
next one.
is picking the right column type, right? So what's really important is that after you create a field, you can't change the column type. So you can change the data type if it's like between a date and a date only, or some of the text options you can change between other like text formatting options kind of, but you can't change like from a text to an option set or vice versa, right? So it's really important to make sure when you're building out your system that you're planning out how you're going to use these fields, how you're going to report on these fields, and make sure you're choosing the right type that makes sense. And I think that really it's going to take you some time as if you're a new administrator, right? Understanding what these types are, understanding their pros and cons, but that's super important and something we encourage you to do. Back to you, Heidi.
Great tip. So this is another fun one that I like to talk about. It's a super underutilized tool in your system admin toolkit. And this is your one-to-n and n-to-one field mapping. This is something that today you can't do at make.powerapps.com, which is typically where you would be administering your system and making changes. This is something that you'll have to switch to the classic solution designer. Or if any of you are on premise, you're just going to do it in your on-premise system right there. So this is something that you configure on the relationship itself. You can't do it on end-to-end, but it will work on one-to-n or end-to-one. And these are some screenshots of what it looks like when you open up a relationship. So the screenshot at the bottom is the relationship itself. This is showing you lead to opportunity. Now, if you're familiar with the CRM sales app at all, there's some magic that happens when you take a lead and you qualify it to an opportunity, right? So I've entered all these details on my lead. I press the qualify button, and my opportunity has all these values that came over from the lead, which are really cool. But if you've added your own custom fields and you want those to push over as well, all you have to do is click that mappings button that's highlighted on the image at the bottom, and you'll see the image pop up that's up here on the top right. And this is where you configure fields. There are some rules to this, and if you come to San Antonio, we'll talk more about it, and I'll tell you all about the rules that you need in order for this to work. But this is the way that you can take the magic of CRM and extend it a little bit further than it does out of the box.
I also love that tip. It's a great one. Something else is the app for Outlook. So there's so much that you can do when you're combining Outlook with your model-driven apps. And I'm a huge fan of server-side sync. I had some bad experiences in the past, but we've worked through them. Now we have a good relationship. And the app for Outlook is just really awesome now compared, especially if you came from on-premise, like we were mentioning, and you used the old Outlook client and maybe it scared you, but now it's time to come back and try out the app for Outlook because it's really awesome when you can control everything now right within Dynamics, approving your mailboxes and pushing out the app from there, and they can use it on the web or on the um, full Outlook client or on the mobile app just from pushing it out from that one place. And so it's really cool to track your emails and create contacts, but also to sync like tasks and appointments back and forth, maybe sync your contacts back and forth. Lots of cool features. So we encourage you to check that out.
Awesome tip. This is a fun one. My heart lies in Power Automate. So in the CRM world, you might be used to classic workflow. So Power Automate is the future. Classic workflows are still around, but eventually we're going to transition everything over to Power Automate. And the reason why these are so much cooler than classic workflows is because they can extend you way beyond the confines of CRM. So you got sales, service, and marketing, and that used to be all you could interact with classic workflows. But with Power Automate, you can have triggers on events that are happening within Dynamics 365 in the CRM system that push out to anything that has a connector. There's 742 connectors right now. Those are Microsoft certified connectors, and you can use any of them. You can either trigger from Dataverse to make activities happen outside of Dataverse, or you can even have things outside pushing into CRM using the Dataverse connector, which is super awesome. So automate your manual tasks using Power Automate, and it could take you so much farther than classic workflows ever could. Even though I
And
still love
that's
classic workflows.
I do too, but I'm trying to get over it. I do love working with Power Automate. And that number of certified connectors, you updated that this morning,
I
right?
do. Yes.
Did. Um, last tip. Oh, we have two more tips for you. So I put in a whole bunch of security tips that we'll talk about in San Antonio, but the one I wanted to mention today was around your dangerous permissions. So there's a lot of things like, let's say you're coming into a system that already exists and already has security in place, and you're just trying to figure out, how can I create value? How can I find issues in this system and things like that? I encourage you to check out which roles are in use and what permissions they have, and make sure that some of these permissions, especially all those down at the bottom in the miscellaneous permissions, check that you actually need them, right? And check that it makes sense, because a lot of these things like bulk delete, bulk edit, export to Excel, maybe those are things you don't need and you might want to clean up for your users.
And I
All
bet
right.
you're saying that because you've learned the hard way once,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Did you have a user accidentally bulk edit or bulk delete and you couldn't roll it back? Because I
I
have.
think I have done that. And so many horror stories on data management issues, right? That I have been responsible for. And then I think the big one too is export to Excel, because there's a lot of times like you're putting your social security numbers in there and you're like, nobody's going to export this. But is that really wise? Like, do you want that? Do you want your salespeople to export the phone numbers for all of their leads when they leave? Probably not, right? Okay, Heidi, on to our last tip.
Well, that's it for today.
Last
So
tip for
take
today.
advantage of all of the awesome community resources. So local user groups like the ones that DynamicsCon has, the Power Platform weekly newsletter, that if you haven't subscribed, that is awesome. There's a group of people that look at all kinds of industry information and they cull it all together once a week and send you out a newsletter with all the important things, all the news from Microsoft, any important blogs that have come out, any interesting videos that they've seen, lots of cool stuff. So if you haven't subscribed yet, you should check it out. The PCF Gallery is another community resource. So if you're looking for any of those visualization controls in the platform of CRM or in any Power App, there are some really great free community tools there. And Kylie and I discovered they're not all working properly today, but there are very valuable tools out there. And Connect a Review. It's mine and my husband's website, but it's a free community resource. We've done a lot of work on Power Automate, and this one specifically is about Power Automate connectors. It's there because I was trying to find connectors that fit a certain use case. Microsoft doesn't catalog them like that, so I did. So those are all awesome links. We'll give you more, and maybe we can pop these links into the chat here after we're done our little session preview.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'll quickly highlight both Heidi and I do run local user groups. So we encourage you to connect with us, follow us, or whatever you like to hear about the events that we're doing. That's all that we have to share as a quick highlight of this session. So I think we have a few minutes before we pass it over. Are there any questions from the audience or from any of our other speakers that you'd like to ask about this session to help you better prepare and get excited?
I'm excited. We're also going to have tips about each of the apps, right? So we did a lot of like high level ones for our highlight here. There will be some specific to sales, service, and marketing and the things that you can find there.
Right. We have so many tips, and I really just picked the tips that we had finished the slides for the most.
That's a great way to pick them.
It was a great preview, actually. I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I don't know about others, but I'm definitely looking forward to your session. So thank you.
Maybe we should make it like 70 tips in 45 minutes. We'll see how
I think
fast
we
we can
could
talk.
do it. It depends. I mean, like a minute, we could get a little bit under the surface with it, but if we're just firing tips, I think we could even do 100.
Both of us can talk really fast. I think we
That's
have the
true.
capacity. Okay, if there are no questions right now, I don't see anyone typing any questions in the chat, which is perfectly fine. I think we'll pass it over to our next speaker, which I believe is Asif, right?
Yep, that's me.
Perfect.
Can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yep.
All right, cool. Well, I'll just introduce myself verbally first, and then share my screen after that. First of all, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate the DynamicsCon live team having me, and I hope all the folks who are in this session right now thinking about coming to San Antonio, hope you can join. I think it'll be a lot of fun. So a quick introduction. Hopefully I won't go too long over here. I've been around in this Microsoft space for a very long time, since 2001 to be specific. And before that, I was a Java and C developer, if I remember correctly. I think that's what I was doing, a lot of Lotus Notes development, stuff like that. But I've been around first in SharePoint, then Microsoft 365 stuff, and then Dynamics 365 stuff. Came across literally hundreds of organizations. I've done administration for a bunch of them. Became a Microsoft certified trainer back in 2004. I did lots of training, consulting, and wrote a few books as well. SharePoint Designer, InfoPath, and other stuff. And I've been an MVP also for the last 15 years. So it's been a pleasure to serve the community. You know, I've noticed in the last decade that I've been really introspective of the things that are going on, that not everything that we create as creators get actually used. So that's where I started diving in a lot more into how do you get adoption of your solutions that you're creating to be much higher. So it's not just stuff that you're creating for the sake of it. You know, the usage has to be there. So my focus is very much on increasing productivity and user adoption, and reducing or hopefully eliminating frustration and then user support tickets. And that's what my session is all about. It's increasing user adoption, specifically in Dynamics 365. So what I want to do is I'll share my screen. I don't have as many slides built in already, but I'll show you a couple. But I do have an environment that I can show with a few things to give you a perspective of what I'll be talking about. Let me know when you can see my screen, please.
Yep,
We can.
looks good.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So, all right, increasing user adoption in Dynamics 365, Asif Rahmani, et cetera, et cetera. And the challenge that I'll focus on in this session is this, as I was just saying, that, you know, interfaces, processes within Dynamics 365, they change frequently. Microsoft is pushing out a couple of updates per year. We're making so many updates to our own environments. Our customers do it all the time, where they change a column, change a table, and this and that. But how do you keep your users continuously supported at their moment of need? That's the main challenge. The agenda that I'll be following in the actual session is going to be understanding the challenge a little bit more deeply and understanding what it's really costing you as an environment, as an organization. And also then after that, exploring the trends that are being put out there by Microsoft and other vendors like Salesforce and SAP, IBM, all the big vendors, of how they're training and supporting their users, whether it's external users or even internal users within the flow of work, talking about that. Then moving on to understanding how you can implement contextual learning and support in Dynamics, because there is already a built-in way to do that, but how many people actually go down that route? And I'll show you what I'm talking about. That does definitely help increase adoption and reduce support tickets, because you're bringing the information, whether it's learning, support, policies, governance, guidelines, whatever you want to call it, you're bringing that information closer to the user when they need it, the actual day-to-day users of Dynamics. But also at the end, I also want to be, very transparent and understand the gotchas that come with this approach, because it's not going to be super simple. There are definitely gotchas. I want to talk about that too, and that I'll be talking about all that stuff in my session. So actually, you know what? Instead of me doing this, I'm going to go ahead and switch to my environment and show you some of these things since I have a few minutes. Okay, so this is a plain vanilla demo environment, right? Dynamics 365. And if you think about a user, when they're working with the built-in tables, aka entities or forms or lists and all that stuff, there are times when CRM users struggle. I'm a CRM user myself, and I struggle at times, still after using it for so long. So when you struggle, what do? Usually it happened to be where you just talk to someone that's sitting by you, right? If you're in a cubicle or an office, or you call someone, or you Google it, or something. But especially in the hybrid environment that we're living in right now, things are just much more challenging, much more difficult. And then many people say the following answer when I ask them this question as to, well, what do you think the users are going to do? They say, well, they're going to click on the question mark. Like, okay, well, has the question mark been helpful to them at their moment of need before? Because here's what it's doing in Dynamics. When you click on the question mark, it gives you this, right? It gives you all these different modules that you have to dig into. And if you're in sales, we're talking about CE here. So if you're in sales, you go into documentation and you start digging in. And who's actually doing that in practicality? I don't know if anybody who's going this route. Now the admins, sure, they go this route, but the actual users, they're not gonna do all that. The best you can hope for is they do a search right here. For example, how do I create a view? Something like this. But even then, they'll get into a situation where there's just too much information. So chances are pretty high they're going to open up a new tab, Google the information. Of course, the problem is that when they find the information, it's going to be good and bad information. It's going to be positive and negative, and it's just going to be taking them away from the policies that you want them to understand, right? So then the question becomes, okay, if you do want to rely on the question mark, how can you make this question mark, this thing right here, a lot more helpful, truly, truly helpful, and not something that, just there for show. So there is a functionality within Microsoft Dynamics called custom help panes and guided tasks. And I'm going to be digging into that particular functionality within this session, showing some of the good stuff, the not so good stuff, and the gotchas and all that stuff in between, so you understand how you can implement it to get the information close to your users, but then still understanding the limitations, so you don't plan for something that's not possible. I think that's pretty important to do so. So here we go. Here's what I'll be talking about much more deeply in the session, that as an admin of Dynamics 365 Sales in this particular case, I can just go to settings, administration, which is where I'm in right now, system settings, and within system settings, there is this enable, let me zoom in here a little bit, enable custom help panes and guided tasks, right? And I've changed that from no to yes. That's it. The actual administration of it, the turning it on, is super simple. You wait a few minutes, and then what happens after that is that within your pages, the form pages, view pages, list pages, everything, everywhere else, there's the contextual nature of the guidance that starts appearing. So now if I click on the question mark as a user, I see this following stuff right here. Okay, so these things did come out of the box. I did not change this at all. I will show you some stuff that I have changed. But in here, it's just giving me a few links to very, very specific documents, well, articles in the docs.microsoft.com site, where it can give me information about leads, because I'm looking at leads right now. So nurture sales, understand the sales process, great. Create or edit leads in Dynamics Sales, create or edit leads. Now this is good, and I definitely recommend providing these kind of leads in here, but there's something you can do even better, which is change these things to what you want it to say, how you want it to be. So here's what I've done. I've actually, in one of the accounts pages, now I keep in mind that when I go from page to page, the actual information is different. It's contextual in nature. So now if I click on the question mark, it's going to be account-based contextual information provided to the task pane, yeah, or the help pane, sorry. So in here, it's telling me some guidance for me as a salesperson. When you deactivate an account, remember to reassign all related records for the account to another user, or else the account will show as active. So that's very specific guidance that's coming from my organization. Okay. Then there's a video that let's say my CRM supervisor went ahead and put in for me about Dynamics 365 Sales, Accounts, and Contacts. I can make this full screen and see what it is. It's a simple video. And then there's some additional links. Now, these links, not all of them are just links to external sources or resources. Some of these links are actually what's called coach marks or balloons. Coach marks, you all have seen it. It's kind of like the inline help that you see online. And balloons are also called walkthroughs. So all this stuff is all built into Dynamics. If I click on, let's say, create a new account, you see what's happening right here? It's pointing to how I can create a new account. Let me do this again. Okay. So this, I've seen this, there are some bugs like that where now the second time around, I'm not seeing this over here. We're going to pretend we didn't see that. I'll figure this out. The next one, create a new view of accounts. So I clicked on it and a balloon showed up. So before that was a coach mark, this is a balloon in this case. Now it's telling me to create a new view, click the ellipses and then click create view. Yeah. All right, so these, the balloons, the coach marks, the external links, the way to configure all that stuff is you go into the actual editing pane over here, and then you have a bunch of different things such as creating number lists, then regular bulleted lists, links, balloons, coach marks, different sections, inserting images, inserting videos. So you have all these things available to you to customize the help pane the way you want for your users. And that's what I meant when I earlier mentioned that you're bringing the information, whether it be policies, guidelines, support, training, whatever it is, closer to the user. So they don't have to click on that question mark and start digging or go get some information that's, that might be unhelpful completely because it's exactly opposite of what you want them to know. So that's about it. I don't want to go too deep into it and take up all the time, but I would welcome questions along this topic. So let me know if there's any questions or thoughts.
No question, but a thought. I'm looking forward to this session very much. I've never actually configured custom guided help, and I think it'll be really cool to see.
Awesome. All right. Anybody else has configured it out there? Would love to hear if anybody has done anything with it.
I haven't. I'm also excited for this session.
Awesome. As Heidi knows, because she was there in one of the conferences with me before, that I'm very deep into this technology. So we've done this kind of stuff in SharePoint and Microsoft 365 apps and other applications, and having this in Dynamics also makes complete sense. You know, but once again, I am going to be talking about some gotchas as well, because Microsoft actually took away some of the functionality from that they had before. So the path is kind of bumpy, but it's good to understand what you're getting into before you do. So I'll talk about all that stuff in my session.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to see, like, Heidi and I both came from the dynamic side, where you kind of came from the other Microsoft and SharePoint, other stuff side. And so it's interesting, like with the Power Platform, we've all come together, but we have very different kind of perceptions of so many things, which I think is really, really interesting. And it'll be really good. It's good for our attendees, right, to have a more well-rounded view of Dynamics and the Power Platform and all that stuff. So that's great.
Absolutely.
I think, Heidi, are you our next preview?
I was going to ask, I wasn't sure. Okay. Yeah, I can do this. So I get to talk twice. I'm so excited. I'm going to do a session about model-driven apps. And I probably shouldn't be going through this because everything changed after I did this. This is the little gotcha with Microsoft, right? They give you a platform and then give you tools and you get used to it and you're rocking it and everything's awesome. And then it all changes. So a few weeks ago, model-driven apps were done in a classics interface or a special preview interface. Well, their preview interface, which they're calling the modern designer, sorry, Sushi, my cat, is very excited about DynamicsCon, as you can see. So anyway, the classics or the modern solution designer and the modern interface for building your apps is now general availability. So some of this stuff is a little, Sushi does want to be a star. Some of it's a little outdated, so I have to go back and update because I'm going to give you the latest, greatest, most awesome, wonderful information about model-driven apps. And the reason why I want to talk about model-driven apps is because I think they're so cool. I think they're the best tool, like us, if I'm really into user adoption and building things that make users' lives easier, right? I don't want to roll out technology just for the sake of rolling it out. If you use a model-driven app, you can tailor the user experience, streamline everything, and make sure that users are seeing only what they want to see. So, like I have here on this last bullet point, it is the most amazing tool for user adoption, I think. I think it's the best tool you have to help your users embrace Power Apps and Dynamics 365. And like I said, model-driven apps, tailored streamline access. What's really cool is, and actually I'm going to share a demo environment that's going to look oddly familiar to what Asif just showed you, because this is also a blank canvas demo environment. But this is the Sales Hub. And when you get the Sales Hub, you have all of these different areas for your users to click in. Even though it's the Sales Hub, I have marketing here, I have cases here, and I just have a lot of stuff in here. And as a user, like if I'm, let's say, inside sales rep, for example, I don't need to see all of this. And then within each of these individual areas, there's all these system views. Because if any of you are system administrators, you know that in order to put something on a dashboard, I have to build a system view for it. So how many system views have you created for the sole purpose of powering a dashboard? That your users just have to know, okay, this whole group of views I'm never ever going to use, but it's here because the system needs it to be here, which is like a terrible reason, right? But it is what it is until now. So instead of this terrible sales hub that shows me too much information, too much noise, I don't know where I'm supposed to go, I come to make.powerapps.com and I go into new and I pick a model-driven app. Now in my session, we're going to build a model-driven app. We're going to talk about all the different components. I'm going to give you a lot more context and a lot more like real world examples, but we're on this call. So let's see what we can do in a few minutes. So we'll call this the Decon app and create. So this is building a shell of a model-driven app, and it's going to start with nothing. And then we're going to build things in here. And you can add a couple things. We add everything by a concept of pages here, which shows up on my left-hand side. And when I click add page, I have three options here. I have a table-based view and form. That would be any one of these areas showing up on the left. That's a table-based view and form. I have a dashboard and I have custom. Ooh, custom. This used to be in preview, but it's not anymore. So custom is where you can start to do really cool things like embed Canvas apps within your model-driven apps. But that's more than I can do in a few minutes. So we're going to go with table-based view and form for now. And then you're just going to go through this wizard. It's a really slick interface. You can start to add different things to this. You can use the text at the top. Like I'm telling you, silly little things get me excited. Because in the classic interface, you'd have to scroll down until you get to the O's. Here, I can just start typing. I can start typing lead, and then everything's going to like filter and give me what I need. So you could do this for all of the areas. You could do it one at a time. It's really whatever works for you. And then you click add. And then it's showing me this preview of what my app looks like in real time. So my navigation is here, and I can start to kind of move my navigation around. So if I want my leads, I'm just going to move them up, and then it shows me what that looks like in real time. But this didn't change my views, right? So this is great. It's streamlined all these areas on my left. So instead of like 15, I have 3. That's one nice thing. But you can take it even further because I don't need all of these views. So I can come over here into my pages and we'll start with leads. We're going to expand it here. And then we've got lead form. So in Dynamics, you'll hear more about this in Kylie and I's 50 tips in 50 minutes. You can do multiple forms, right? So there are different forms for different users. That's a typical tool that a system admin will use. But maybe for the users of this app, they only need the one form. And I don't want to confuse them by offering them more than one, because you know your users are going to click it. They're going to find everything they can and change it. And then you're going to get phone calls from users saying, my form doesn't look like that. And you can avoid all of that by just showing them the one form they need to use. But the cooler thing here is lead view. And on the right-hand panel where it flies out, we're going to pick a view. And then all of your system views are here. All the views that you've created to power your dashboards, different system charts you have, things that nobody's actually going to need. I need my open leads. And I need, let's say, closed leads. And I don't need anything else. So then I save it. And this can take a minute or two. This is where virtual conferences are cool because I can like edit that part out. And then you publish, and then you can click play up here, which will give you like a live demo of what your app's going to look like to your end users. And you would repeat this for all the different areas you need. And then instead of seeing that awful list down the left and the ridiculous amount of system views here, I can streamline everything. So my users are only seeing those few pieces of information that they need. So look how much nicer that is. And we're going to make this much nicer in our live demo. We're going to rename groups. We're going to add groups. We're going to prettify it. We're going to do all kinds of cool things. But for this, Now you can see as a user, oh, look, here's my open leads and here's my closed leads. I don't need to go anywhere else. There's the two things that I need. And grouping these based on your users and how they use the system is brilliant. And it's such a great tool to help your users. They'll be so happy that you have changed their user experience from this to this. Is anyone else excited about model-driven apps, or is that just me? Just me? Molly is. All right. What else am I going to talk about in model-driven apps? I'm going to take a look over at my slides over here. Basically, how to work with pages, how to update your navigation, which are these areas on the left. And yeah, I think that's about it, unless you want to learn a little bit more now. I'm also going to point out the few things that you can't do in this interface, because there's a reason why when you go to Power Apps, there's a button at the top. It says Switch to Classic. Can you see it up here? So when I click Switch to Classic, this opens the older interface. They call it fondly the classic design experience. And this exists for one reason. It does things that Power Apps can't do yet. So we're going to point out what those things are. There are neat things you can do and add things like a URL to your navigation. So that's something you could do here. Different web resources, business process flows, all kinds of cool stuff that you have to come do over here. Also, fun things that you don't need to do, they're nice to do. Like if I want a different image on my app title, I can configure that here. If I want to get my URL, so I can just copy this URL and then paste it and give it to my users, they bookmark that. Then every time they go to my Dynamics 365 system, they go directly to the app they're meant to go into. So many neat things. So I think that I will stop there. I don't want to overwhelm you with excitement yet. You have to come to San Antonio for that. And we'll talk about all these components, and then we'll build an app or two together. Any questions? San Antonio. Thanks, Denise. All right. Well, if you have no questions for me, I will turn it over to the wonderful Aiden, who can talk to you about his session.
All right. Thank you very much, Heidi. And thank you for the introduction. I am Aiden Kaskela. I'm a 5-time business application MVP, and my session is called Upgrade Your Automation Workflows to Power Automate. And thank you, Heidi, for the awesome warm-up earlier and one of your super tips. So I'm very excited to share because those are some great reasons that people should be using it. The original idea for the session, or what originally inspired me for the session, was when Microsoft released Power Automate a few years ago. They brought out this cool tool and they said, this is our great new integration and automation engine. Everybody should use it instead of classic workflows. And by the way, classic workflows are deprecated, or at least that's kind of what people heard when they announced it. And that really, frankly scared a lot of people, because classic workflows have been the same for 15 years. And a lot of people have built really critical functionality using these tools, which, granted, they've had their limitations. They haven't really evolved, but they do a pretty good job at what they do. And so, a lot of people were suddenly faced with the need to recreate this function, or they believed they had to recreate this functionality in Power Automate. And so that's what this session started out as, is kind of a beginner's guide to recreating your classic workflows in Power Automate. Heidi spoke to the hundreds of connectors that they have and literally getting new ones every day. It's incredibly powerful, and I'll talk about some of the cool things. But the reason that I love Power Automate is because I'm a developer. I've been writing code for and against Dynamics CRM for 16 years, and integrations are hard. They are error prone. They take a long time to develop, and they are difficult to test. Basically, all the reasons that I hate writing code for integrations, Power Automate simplifies all of that incredibly. It's really powerful still. So, don't let the interface, it can be a little deceptive because it looks simple and you can do simple things with it, but you can also do really powerful things. So in the session, we kind of have 3 tiers, and we'll move through from, the beginner objectives that I originally had for the session. And so we're going to start with, the basics. How do, coming from a classic workflow perspective, how do you mimic the triggers from classic workflows? So things like setting up your trigger events. Some cool things that you can't do in classic workflows, like only run if the status changes, but only if it's one of these 3 statuses. You can't get that granular in classic workflows. And then once your flow is running, how to perform the same action. So things like creating and updating records, sending emails, performing actions in Dynamics, and that sort of thing. So really, kind of basics. How do we how do we recreate your classic workflow in Power Automate? From there, we'll kind of move into more, say, intermediate level topics. And this is where it gets to things that you can't do in classic workflows. One that I use all the time is recurring flows. And you have, you can set up scheduled processes. So you can do things like, run this flow every day at 3 a.m. and look for these records and update this field, or send out these emails for everybody, whose invoice is 2 weeks past due, that sort of thing. There's never been a good solution for how to do that, right? There were tricks like using the bulk delete job to kick off some workflows and things like that, but that was always fragile. I always ended up writing, like a console app that would run kicked off by Windows Scheduler, or you have something in Azure that a pro dev has to write, right? But you can do all that in Power Automate now. So we'll look at that. We'll look at the expression builder, and you can build some pretty complex expressions in Power Automate that can pretty much replace your custom workflow activities. So again, I have a tool, Workflow Elements, I built. It's super popular, and pretty much all of the things that it does that you couldn't do out of the box with custom workflow, with classic workflows, you can do pretty much all that stuff now with the expression builder. So we're going to look at that. And then we're going to look at control logic. And control logic is what's responsible for the actual path of your logic throughout your flow. So you can do things like branch off based on different conditions and set up, a switch statement type functionality and kind of rejoin your paths. So really kind of, more advanced stuff. From the intermediate, we're going to move on to the advanced topics. And here I'm going to talk about 3 things. The first one is HTTP triggers for our flow. And this lets you run your flow code from anywhere, or your flow process from anywhere. And so that lets you tie it in from places like if you have a model-driven app, you can add a button on the ribbon, which invokes your flow, or you have a web resource, or you call it from a webhook, or things like that. So very cool way to expand that functionality. Second advanced topic is how to run your flows as real-time or synchronous flows. And you'll see everybody say that flows cannot run as real-time. It's impossible. That's not true. You can run them as real-time, and you can do that from Dynamics. There are some tricks, which is why it's in the advanced area. But that's one of the big discrepancies now, or out of the box disparities between classic workflows and Power Automate. And then the third thing that we're going to talk about under the advanced grouping is how to run your custom code. So within classic workflows, you have your custom workflow activities. With Flow, or with Power Automate, you can run that code that lives in Dataverse, or you can call code that lives in Azure. And the coolest thing I'm really excited about, my favorite new feature, is you can actually write C# to run directly in Power Automate and execute that from your flow. So I'm super excited about it. There is a lot of content, and it covers different experience levels. So we're not going to get to the perfect level for everybody in the crowd. But I'm planning to be there for the entire conference, and I'm obviously very passionate about talking about this. So please, if we kind of gloss over something that you want to know more about, grab me in the hallway. I'd love to talk about it, and I'll I'll probably spend the rest of the day talking to you. Yeah, so that's my slides.
I really like how you have 3 different levels here. I feel like
Thank
I'm
you.
solidly in beginner and towing the line of intermediate. It's going to be so cool.
It's a really, I mean, it's my favorite thing. I was a little skeptical at first of Power Automate as a platform, but I was a big fan of like, there's another service, a pre-existing service called Integrate from Thing to Thing, and that got me excited. So I'm a huge fan of Power Automate. I'd love to talk about it with anybody who's interested. So.
Does anyone have questions for Aiden and his love of Power Automate?
Or any Stump the MVP questions that can be a preview for our Solve Your CE Problems session.
Yeah, I really hope people take advantage of that. So when Kylie and I were kind of thinking about the agenda, I think we were thinking about when we were attendees, when we worked for a company as a customer, and we were in charge of the CRM system, what would be beneficial? And we're like, I want to go up to a panel of experts and be like, this is my problem. How can you fix me? And that's what we're hoping this will be. But that will only work if you bring us your problems and let us help you. Consultants charge around $200 per hour. So come sit with us for, you get a panel of people for 1 hour. I mean, that's the cost of admission alone for DynamicsCon.
I have a good question for our MVP panel. How do you handle making something confidential? So we have a situation where we have activities. Currently, everybody has access to all activities, but they want to be able to flip a switch on certain activities and make them confidential so only people in their group can see. Has anyone dealt with that? That's my problem I've been dealing with this week.
Are you doing a session on security?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I send you to that?
I'll send you to my own session. Yes.
So can you have different owners of the activities and the related
records? I think that's what I have to do. Yeah. I think that's kind of been my best solution so far, is to have them check a box, and then a flow will run and reassign the record to somebody else. Although I guess it gets complicated with activities if that activity is closed, right? We'll have to reopen it, reassign, and close it again.
So how do you have your security set up on your activities? Is it org, parent, child, business unit, user level? That affects a lot of that. Right. And is it really the activity? The only reason I'm asking this is I have the same use case.
The same problem.
Is it really the activity that's the private, or is it the associated record associated with the activity, aka a confidential notes table that only you, the user, could see? And I don't mean native notes, just a separate table for something. Or can you utilize the notes feature and give that a user level read, not business unit level? But that does hinder you for other things. So it really depends on what that real use case is in the end. Yeah. I had the same use case for a while, and only 2 people actually used it, believe it or not, in this year alone. So we're actually just going to turn that use case completely off.
You have hit the nail on the head, as they say, because we are asking those exact same questions. Yep. 1, is anybody actually going to use this feature? 2, do we need, I think the association, like you said, might be public, but there's probably certain notes that might be private. So the other thing we talked about was having one like confidential field that only certain people had access to, which wouldn't allow us to do it by business unit, but it would allow us to at least partially meet the requirement. And if nobody's going to use it, then maybe that'll be okay.
Right, but the question is, who can see it? That would be my question.
Right.
Who needs to see this? I will use confidential field. Is it only the person who creates the data in it?
Right.
If that's the truth, then just create a separate entity, give it user level privileges, for lack of better words, use the PC or the forms component control as it's a lookup record. You're only going to have one record, embed that in and just give them a memo field to show the data. And it's only going to show data and show up for that user who has access to that relying table.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it's an absolute must.
Agreed. And now
Yeah.
you can all see as well, you don't have to be a presenter to have all the answers at DynamicsCon. Just come to meet all the other smart people who attend.
Absolutely. You can always tell someone who's been around the industry for a while because they call them entities instead of tables.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes.
I'm
Well, it
trying
depends on if
really
you're using
hard.
classic or regular, because depends on which way you go. Because not everything is in the new UI, and you can't do everything in the new UI. So
yeah,
True.
it's a
can I
tough time to
sit
be
on this medic
systematic.
table? I'd have too much fun with this.
Yeah, I know it's going to be a blast. There's a really cool conversation happening in the chat if nobody's checking out the chat. So I think we should talk about Monica's question here. She had a question about flow ownership, and Aiden's given her tons of awesome answers. So do you guys want to talk about your flow ownership stuff?
Sure, Monica. If you're able to come off mute and clarify as well. So I believe the owner of a Cloudflow has to be a licensed user. The connections can be an app registration, but the flow proper can only be owned by a headed user. So are you referring to the flow ownership or the connections within that flow?
It's actually both. I guess we're cheating here because we created an app registration, and in the app registration, when you put it into Dynamics, we assigned it system admin, system user. So we're not even consuming a license against the client, which allowed us to also put the flow into that app registration name. And then for the actions within the connection reference, we're also referencing the app registration. And it's actually working pretty good because when we go debug and we look at the audit history, we've identified like the connection reference and whatnot. And like in one situation, we'll have it called, Power Automate user. So we know that action in the audit history was performed by that. Versus, I'm sorry. Versus if it was a workflow, we're kind of doing the same thing. We created a different app registration and called it, workflow process. So if a process runs against it on the audit history, we'll be able to tell the difference between them.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of, so I put a link in there. I believe that describes that only a person should be the owner of the flow, and for licensing reasons, because an app registration, like, as you said, you can do pretty much anything with that for free. So, with that aside, I'm a huge proponent of using app registrations for integrations wherever possible. It's more secure, it's easier to manage. You don't have to worry about somebody getting hit by a bus and then you lose all the functionality that user had.
Exactly.
Yeah. So in general, I'm a big fan. Don't always follow it, but because it's 5 minutes more work. But depending on your organization, it could be 3 months more work to get that set up. But yeah, in general, I'm all for it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
I would echo your comment there. The service account has to be a licensed user to be in compliance with licensing. So just keep that in mind.
So no one here heard that you're cheating, Monica, but
I'm surprised that it's actually working from a licensing component standpoint. So I
think it has to be, it would still have to be created by a headed user, right? So you would have a real licensed user as the owner, but then I guess you could add a co-owner, which would be your app registration. Is that what the setup would be?
No, actually, I want to say we're cheating here, but I'm going to go immediately change them right now after this.
Yeah, I think with that link I dropped in, I think one of the suggestions it has is you create a licensed user and you treat that as a service account. So you still might only have your username and password for that account, but it's not, Bob, it's my Power Automate user.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
I think that puts us at time. So Denise and Molly, did you want to say any final words? Other than see you all in San Antonio, I hope.
See you all in San Antonio. And thank you all for joining us today. We will also send out a recording of today's session. So if you want to share this with your friends and the discount code, we sure do appreciate it. And if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out. We're here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you
all.
very much.
Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi, Javier.